The distant rumble of hooves shattered the peaceful afternoon like thunder from a clear sky, sending tremors through the earth that made Emma Larkin's blood run cold. It was 1878, and the unforgiving plains of eastern Oregon offered nowhere to hide as she spotted the massive cloud of dust barreling toward her homestead. Her 4-year-old son Timothy clutched her skirts, his eyes wide with terror as the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate with increasing violence. "Mama!" Timothy cried, his small fingers digging into the worn fabric of her calico dress. Emma's throat constricted with fear as she saw the first of the massive longhorns emerge from the dust cloud, followed by hundreds more, a stampeding river of muscle and horn that would flatten anything in its path. She snatched Timothy into her arms and ran toward the shallow creek bed, the only depression in the flat landscape that might offer the slightest protection. "Hold tight to me," she shouted over the deafening thunder of the approaching cattle. Time seemed to stretch and compress as Emma realized with sickening clarity that they wouldn't make it. The creek bed was still 50 yards away, and the leading edge of the stampede was closing in too quickly. She stumbled, nearly dropping Timothy as her worn boot caught on a rock hidden in the tall prairie grass. In that moment of terror, Emma saw a rider materialize from the edge of her vision, a lone figure on horseback galloping parallel to the stampede, dust billowing behind him. The man leaned forward in his saddle, pushing his mount to impossible speeds as he raced toward them. Isaac Keller had been driving his small herd to market when he spotted the woman and child in the path of the stampeding cattle. Without hesitation, he dug his spurs into his stallion's flanks, knowing he had mere seconds to reach them. The dust stung his eyes and filled his lungs as he pushed through the cloud of dirt kicked up by thousands of hooves. "Head for the creek," he shouted, though his voice was swallowed by the thunderous noise. Emma clutched Timothy tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs as the stranger bore down on them. The man's face was obscured by a bandana pulled up against the dust, but his eyes burned with determination above the fabric. In one fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle, he leaned down and swept his arm around Emma's waist, hauling both her and Timothy onto his horse in front of him. The animal staggered under the sudden weight, but maintained its footing as Isaac yanked the reins hard, turning the horse back toward the creek bed. Emma felt his arm like iron around her waist as they raced the wall of cattle that threatened to overtake them from behind. "Hang on," Isaac shouted directly into her ear, the warmth of his breath a stark contrast to the cold terror gripping her body. They reached the creek bed with seconds to spare, the horse sliding down the embankment as Isaac guided it into the shallow depression. He dismounted in a flash, pulling Emma and Timothy down with him and pressing them against the dirt wall of the creek bed, shielding them with his body as the first of the cattle thundered past overhead. The ground shook violently as hundreds of animals charged by, mere feet above their heads. Dirt and small rocks rained down on them from the creek bank. Timothy sobbed against Emma's chest while she clutched him tightly, her face pressed against the stranger's shoulder. The man's arms formed a protective cage around them both, his body absorbing the falling debris as he held them close to the earth. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the rumbling began to subside. The deafening noise gradually faded, though the dust hung thick in the air, making it difficult to breathe. Slowly, Isaac pulled away from Emma and Timothy, his eyes scanning their faces for injury. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice hoarse from dust and exertion. Emma shook her head, too stunned to speak as she checked Timothy for injuries. The boy was frightened but unharmed, his small face streaked with tears and dirt. "Thank you," she finally managed, meeting the stranger's gaze. You saved our lives." Isaac pulled the bandana down from his face, revealing strong features weathered by sun and wind. He was younger than Emma had first thought, perhaps 30 to her 26 years, with deep-set eyes the color of the prairie sky after a storm. "Isaac Keller," he said simply, offering a slight nod. "Lucky I was nearby." "Emma Larkin," she replied, finally finding her voice. "And this is my son, Timothy." Timothy peered up at the tall stranger, his earlier fear giving way to childish awe. "You ride real fast, mister." A small smile cracked the dust on Isaac's face. "Midnight here is the fastest horse in the territory," he said, patting the ebony stallion that stood nearby, still breathing heavily from the exertion. "And today I'm mighty glad of that fact." As they climbed out of the creek bed to survey the aftermath, Emma's heart sank. In the distance, where her small homestead had stood just minutes before, there was nothing but trampled earth and splintered wood. The modest cabin she had built with her late husband Daniel had been directly in the path of the stampede. "Oh no," she whispered, her legs suddenly weak beneath her. Isaac followed her gaze and understood immediately. Without a word, he helped her back onto his horse, lifting Timothy up, before mounting behind them. They rode in silence toward the destroyed homestead, the reality of Emma's situation becoming clearer with every hoofbeat. The cabin was beyond salvage. The walls had been reduced to kindling, and their few possessions were scattered across the prairie. Even the small vegetable garden had been obliterated, leaving nothing but churned earth. Emma dismounted slowly, Timothy clinging to her neck as she surveyed the destruction of everything she had worked so hard to build since Daniel's death 2 years ago. The storm cellar, she suddenly remembered, hurrying to a spot several yards from where the cabin had stood. To her relief, the heavy wooden doors of the underground shelter remained intact, though they were partially covered by debris. Isaac helped her clear away the wreckage, pulling the doors open to reveal the small space below that contained emergency supplies and the few valuables Emma had stored for safekeeping. Among them was a small leather pouch containing her husband's pocket watch and the wedding ring she couldn't bear to wear after his passing. "At least we have something," she said softly, more to herself than to Isaac as she clutched the pouch to her chest. Isaac surveyed the destroyed homestead with a practiced eye. "Night's coming soon. You can't stay here." Emma looked up at the darkening sky, the reality of their situation hitting her anew. They had no shelter, minimal supplies, and were miles from the nearest neighbor. "Oregon City is almost 20 miles south," she said, naming the small settlement where she occasionally traded eggs and vegetables for supplies. "We could never walk there before dark." "You won't be walking," Isaac said firmly. "I'll take you there." Emma hesitated, studying this stranger who had already risked his life to save them. In the wild frontier of the Oregon Territory, trust didn't come easily, but she had few options. "Why would you do that?" she asked directly, holding Timothy closer. Isaac's expression remained unreadable. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because no one should be left without shelter when a storm's brewing." He nodded toward the western horizon where dark clouds were gathering, promising rain before morning. With no real alternative, Emma gathered what she could salvage from the cellar: a blanket, a small sack of flour, some dried meat, and her meager savings. Isaac secured the items to his saddle and helped her mount once more, positioning Timothy between them for the journey. As they rode away from the ruined homestead, Emma couldn't help the tears that slipped down her dust-streaked face. 2 years of backbreaking work gone in an instant. Daniel had brought her west with promises of land and opportunity, but all she'd found was hardship and loss. "We'll be all right, Mama," Timothy said with the simple faith of childhood, patting her arm. "The fast-riding man will help us." Emma wiped her tears, embarrassed to show such weakness before a stranger. "Yes, sweetheart," she murmured, though she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Isaac kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, giving her the privacy of her grief while guiding Midnight at a steady pace. The stallion, though tired from the earlier exertion, moved with surprising strength beneath the weight of 3 riders. "That stampede didn't start naturally," Isaac said after they'd ridden in silence for several miles. "Cattle don't spook like that without cause." Emma turned slightly to look at his profile. "What do you mean? Someone wanted those cattle scattered." "Probably rustlers looking to pick off strays once the herd breaks up." His jaw tightened. They wouldn't have cared who got in the way. The implication that someone had deliberately caused the disaster that destroyed her home added a new layer of bitterness to Emma's grief. "How can you be sure?" "Been working cattle since I was 12, he replied. "You develop an instinct for these things." He paused. "I'm sorry about your home." The simple words of sympathy spoken without pity brought fresh tears to Emma's eyes. "It wasn't much," she said, trying to sound stronger than she felt. "But it was ours. You've been alone there, just you and the boy," Emma nodded. "Since my husband died. 2 years now." Isaac didn't press for details, and Emma was grateful. Daniel's death from pneumonia after falling through river ice during a winter hunt had left her alone with a 2-year-old child and a half-built homestead. She'd learned quickly that the frontier had little mercy for a widow with a young child. As they rode, Timothy eventually dozed off, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's gait and exhausted from the day's terror. Emma found herself leaning back slightly against Isaac's chest, her own fatigue catching up with her. "Rest if you can," he said quietly. "I'll wake you when we reach town." Despite her intention to remain alert, the steady heartbeat she could feel against her back, and the secure arm that kept her from falling eventually pulled her into an uneasy sleep. Emma woke to the sound of distant voices and the glow of lamplight. They had reached the outskirts of Oregon City, a small but growing settlement that served as a trading post for homesteaders and travelers heading further west. The main street consisted of a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other businesses. At the edge of town stood Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, a 2-story structure that offered clean rooms and hot meals to travelers. "Mrs. Holloway will have space," Isaac said, guiding Midnight toward the boarding house. "She's a good woman." The light rain that had begun to fall during their journey had dampened their clothing, but not enough to soak through. Still, Emma shivered in the cool evening air as Isaac helped her down from the horse, Timothy still sleeping in her arms. "Mrs. Holloway answered the door in her nightdress, a shawl hastily thrown over her shoulders. Her expression of annoyance quickly changed to concern when she saw Emma's disheveled state and the sleeping child. "Mercy, what's happened?" she asked, ushering them inside without hesitation. "Stampede took their home," Isaac explained briefly. "They need shelter for the night, maybe longer." Mrs. Holloway, a plump widow in her 50s with kind eyes and practical hands, immediately took charge. "Of course they'll stay. Emma Larkin, isn't it? I remember you from your visits to town. Come, I have a room you can use." Emma followed gratefully, her arms aching from holding Timothy. The boarding house was warm and smelled of bread and coffee, comforts she hadn't realized she'd been missing in her isolated existence. "And you, Mr. Keller, Mrs. Holloway asked, turning back to Isaac, who lingered in the doorway. "I need to see to my horse and find the sheriff," he replied. "Those cattle didn't stampede on their own." Mrs. Holloway nodded in understanding. "There's a room for you two when you're done. No charge tonight for either of you," she added firmly when Emma began to protest. "The Lord knows I've needed help in my time." Isaac met Emma's eyes briefly before turning to leave. "I'll check on you tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying an unexpected gentleness that made Emma's heart flutter strangely in her chest. Once he had gone, Mrs. Holloway helped Emma settle Timothy in a small but clean room with a double bed that seemed luxuriously soft after months of sleeping on a straw mattress. The older woman brought up a basin of warm water and clean towels, allowing Emma to wash away the dust and tears of the day. "That man saved our lives," Emma said softly as she dampened a cloth to clean Timothy's face without waking him. "I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't come along." Mrs. Holloway smiled knowingly. "Isaac Keller has a reputation for being in the right place at the right time. He's a good man, though he keeps to himself mostly. Drives cattle between ranches and to market, does some hunting and tracking when needed." She paused. "Lost his wife in childbirth about 5 years back. The baby, too." The information gave Emma a new perspective on the quiet man who had risked his life for strangers. Perhaps his understanding of loss had driven him to prevent hers. "Get some rest, dear," Mrs. Holloway said, patting Emma's shoulder. "Tomorrow is soon enough to worry about what comes next." Alone with her sleeping son, Emma finally allowed herself to fully process the day's events. She had lost nearly everything, yet somehow felt a curious sense of relief. The isolated homestead had been Daniel's dream, not hers, and maintaining it alone had been a constant struggle against nature, loneliness, and fear. She stroked Timothy's hair gently, wondering if perhaps this disaster might somehow lead to a better path for them both. When she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were a confused mixture of thundering hooves and storm blue eyes that watched over her with unexpected tenderness. Morning brought the reality of her situation into sharp focus. Emma woke to Timothy's excited chatter as he discovered the novelty of staying in a proper house with stairs and multiple rooms. After a breakfast that Mrs. Holloway insisted they eat, Emma found herself facing the practical questions she'd been too exhausted to consider the night before. "I have some money saved," she told Mrs. Holloway as they washed the breakfast dishes together. "Enough for a few nights' lodging and maybe passage back east to my sister in Pennsylvania." The older woman considered this as she dried a plate with methodical care. "Is that what you want?" "To go back east?" Emma paused, her hands stilling in the soapy water. "I don't know," she admitted. "There's nothing left for us here but back east." She shook her head. "My sister's husband never approved of Daniel or our decision to come west. They'd take us in, but—" "But you'd rather make your own way," Mrs. Holloway finished for her with understanding. "Well, as it happens, Doc Miller's wife has been looking for help with their children. They have 4 little ones now, and she needs someone to help with the housekeeping and minding the youngest while she assists the doctor. They have rooms above the surgery that have stood empty since her mother passed." The suggestion sparked a flicker of hope in Emma's chest. "Do you think they'd consider me?" "I don't see why not. You're sensible, clean, and good with children from what I can see." Mrs. Holloway smiled. "I'll speak to Sarah Miller when she comes by later." The possibility of employment and housing in town lifted Emma's spirits considerably. Oregon City wasn't large, but it offered community and safety that her isolated homestead had lacked. For Timothy's sake especially, the change might be a blessing in disguise. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Holloway went to answer it, returning a moment later with Isaac Keller behind her. He had cleaned up since the previous evening, his dark hair still damp from washing and his clothes changed, though they carried the same worn, practical quality of a man who lived most of his life outdoors. "Mr. Keller has news," Mrs. Holloway announced, gesturing for him to speak. Isaac nodded a greeting to Emma. "Sheriff Bennett and I rode out at first light to look at the Stampede path," he explained. "We found evidence that the cattle were deliberately spooked. Someone fired shots near the herd and drove them directly toward the homesteads in that area." Emma's hands clenched around the dishcloth she was holding. "Who would do such a thing? And why?" Isaac's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out. Your place wasn't the only one damaged." "The Wilcox farm was hit too, though they were in town when it happened." He paused. "There's been talk of a railroad company buying up land in that area. Some speculate they might be creating problems to force people to sell cheap." The notion that her misfortune might have been deliberately caused sent a chill through Emma. "Do you believe that's what happened?" "I don't know yet," Isaac admitted, "but I aim to find out." He met her eyes directly. "The sheriff asked me to help investigate. I've done tracking work for him before." "Mr. Keller is quite well known for his abilities in that regard," Mrs. Holloway interjected with evident approval. "If anyone can find who did this, he can." Emma nodded slowly, processing this information. "Thank you for telling me. I hope you find whoever is responsible." "I wanted to make sure you and Timothy were settling in all right," Isaac said, his usual taciturn manner softening slightly. "And to tell you that I salvaged a few more things from your homestead this morning. They're on the porch." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Emma followed him outside where she found a small pile of items he had rescued from the rubble. A framed daguerreotype of Daniel that had somehow survived, a wooden toy horse that Daniel had carved for Timothy's 3rd birthday, and remarkably, the small trunk containing her wedding dress and a few family keepsakes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, clutching the picture frame to her chest. Isaac shifted uncomfortably under her gratitude. "No need for thanks, just doing what anyone would do." "No," Emma countered gently. "Not anyone would have ridden into a stampede to save strangers. Not anyone would go back to search through rubble for memories that matter to someone else." A faint color touched Isaac's weathered cheeks. "Well," he said after a moment, "I should get back to the sheriff. I'll let you know what we find out." As he turned to go, Timothy came barreling out the door and collided with Isaac's legs, looking up at him with unabashed admiration. "Are you leaving, Mr. Fast Rider?" he asked, using the nickname he'd created. Isaac looked down at the boy with a softening expression that transformed his face. "Just for now, partner. Got some work to do. Will you come back and tell us more about your fast horse? Mama says you saved us because you're brave." Timothy's innocent directness made Emma blush. "I suppose I could do that," Isaac replied seriously, as though considering a business proposition. "If your mother doesn't mind." Both males looked to Emma, who found herself smiling despite the complications of their situation. "We'd be glad of the company," she said simply. With a tip of his hat, Isaac left them to begin his investigation. But Emma found her thoughts returning to him throughout the day as she met with Sarah Miller and secured the position as helper in the doctor's household. The arrangements were quickly made. Emma and Timothy would move into the rooms above the surgery the following day, and she would begin work immediately. "It's perfect timing," Sarah Miller told her earnestly. "With the new baby and the practice getting busier, I've been at my wits' end trying to manage everything. Having help with the children and the housekeeping will be such a relief." Emma found herself genuinely looking forward to the arrangement. The Millers seemed kind, and the work would be far less physically demanding than maintaining a homestead alone. Most importantly, Timothy would have other children to play with and the protection of living in town. That evening, true to his word, Isaac returned to the boarding house. He had spent the day with Sheriff Bennett, following the trail of the men who had caused the stampede, but had found only cold camps and confusing trails that suggested the perpetrators knew the area well. Whoever did this covered their tracks, he explained as they sat in Mrs. Holloway's parlor after dinner, Timothy having finally succumbed to sleep upstairs. But they'll make a mistake eventually. People always do. Mrs. Holloway told me you're good at tracking, Emma said. Is that how you make your living, tracking and cattle driving? Isaac nodded, his large hands resting on his knees as he leaned forward slightly in the overstuffed chair that seemed too delicate for his frame. I do a bit of everything. Hunting, guiding when needed. I have a small place about 10 miles outside of town where I keep a few horses. Mrs. Holloway also mentioned that you. Emma hesitated, unsure if she should acknowledge what she had been told about his past. That I was married once, he finished for her, his expression guarded but not angry. Yes, Catherine was her name. She died 5 years ago trying to bring our son into the world. He stated the facts plainly, but Emma could see the old pain in the tightening around his eyes. I'm sorry, she said softly. I lost Daniel 2 winters ago. Pneumonia. Isaac nodded, accepting her shared grief without comment. A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that can only exist between two people who have experienced similar losses. Timothy seems to have taken a shine to you, Emma observed after a while, changing the subject to lighter ground. A small smile touched Isaac's lips. He's a good boy. You've done well with him. I've tried, Emma sighed. It hasn't been easy on my own. I worry sometimes that he needs more than I can give him. You kept him alive and healthy in harsh country, Isaac pointed out. That's no small thing. His simple validation of her efforts meant more than elaborate compliments might have. Emma found herself studying his face in the warm lamplight, noticing the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he hadn't always been so serious, and the careful way he chose his words, as though each one carried weight. Mrs. Miller hired me today, she told him, feeling strangely eager to share her news. Timothy and I will be living above the doctor's surgery. I'll be helping with their children and the housekeeping. Isaac nodded his approval. The Millers are good people. You'll be safer in town, especially with whoever caused that stampede still out there. The reminder of the danger sobered Emma. Do you really think they were trying to drive people off their land? It makes sense, Isaac replied, his expression turning grim. The railroad surveyors have been through this area several times in the past year. Land that wasn't worth much suddenly becomes valuable when steel tracks are coming through. But surely they could offer to buy the land legally, Emma protested. Isaac gave a short, humorless laugh. Why pay fair prices when intimidation might get it for less? I've seen it happen before, back in Kansas. The conversation shifted to Isaac's experiences in different territories before he had settled in Oregon 5 years earlier, around the time of his wife's death, though he didn't explicitly connect the two events. Emma found herself drawn into his stories of the changing West, the gradual taming of wild places, and the encroachment of civilization with its mixed blessings. Sometimes I think I was born too late, he admitted. The wide open spaces get smaller every year. Is that why you live outside of town? Emma asked. To keep that freedom, he considered this, tilting his head slightly. Partly, and partly because after Catherine died, being around people was difficult. He looked somewhat surprised at his own candor. I'm not much for talking usually. You're doing fine, Emma assured him with a small smile. And I understand the need for space after loss. If circumstances hadn't forced me to be strong for Timothy, I might have given in to grief entirely when Daniel died. Isaac's eyes held a new respect as he looked at her. Children have a way of pulling us forward when we'd rather stand still. The depth of understanding in his words created a connection between them that transcended their brief acquaintance. When Mrs. Holloway discreetly announced that it was getting late. Emma was surprised to find that several hours had passed in conversation. Isaac rose to take his leave. "I'll be heading out with the sheriff again tomorrow to continue the investigation, but I'll check in when I return." "I'd like that," Emma replied, suddenly shy. "Timothy would too." As she watched him walk down the street toward the livery where he'd stabled Midnight, Emma felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. For the first time since Daniel's death, she had spoken to a man not as a widow seeking help or making a business arrangement, but simply as a woman enjoying the company of someone who understood her. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Emma and Timothy moved their meager belongings to the rooms above the doctor's surgery. Sarah Miller proved to be a warm, if somewhat scattered, young mother who welcomed Emma's calm efficiency with obvious relief. The Miller children, ages 7, 5, 3, and 6 months, immediately accepted Timothy into their boisterous fold, much to his delight. "I haven't seen the floors this clean in months," Sarah marveled as Emma finished her first day's work. And the children actually napped, all at the same time. "You're a miracle worker, Mrs. Larkin." Emma smiled, pleased that she could be truly useful. "Please call me Emma, and it's no miracle, just experience and a bit of organization." "Emma, then," Sarah agreed warmly. "And I insist you join us for supper. Robert will want to meet you properly. Doctor." Robert Miller proved to be as kind as his wife, though more reserved in nature. He treated Emma with respect rather than as a servant, including her in the dinner conversation and asking thoughtful questions about her experiences as a homesteader. "It must have been incredibly difficult managing alone," he commented, passing her a bowl of stewed apples. "Many men wouldn't have attempted what you accomplished." "I had little choice," Emma replied honestly. "And truthfully, if not for the Stampede, I would have continued. But perhaps it was for the best. Timothy needs more than isolation and hard work." Dr. Miller nodded in understanding. "Children thrive with community. And speaking of the Stampede, Isaac Keller stopped by the surgery this afternoon. Asked me to tell you he'd be gone a few days following a trail with the sheriff." Emma tried to hide her disappointment at this news. "I hope they find whoever was responsible." "Isaac generally finds what he's looking for," Dr. Miller said with confidence. "He's tracked lost children and stolen horses through impossible country. If anyone can identify the culprits, it's him." The Millers' obvious respect for Isaac reinforced Emma's growing regard for the quiet cowboy. Throughout the next several days, as she settled into her new role and Timothy blossomed in the company of other children, she found herself watching the street for Isaac's return, a fact that didn't escape Sarah Miller's notice. "He's quite handsome in that rugged way, isn't he?" Sarah commented casually one afternoon as they folded laundry together, the children playing in the garden under the watchful eye of the Millers' elderly housekeeper who came in for a few hours each day. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Keller." "I suppose he is, though I hadn't thought of it." Sarah's knowing smile indicated she didn't believe this for a moment. "He's been alone too long, that man. Catherine's death hit him hard, but 5 years is a long time to grieve." "We've barely met," Emma protested mildly. "And I'm hardly thinking of anything of that nature. My husband's only been gone 2 years. 2 years is also a long time," Sarah replied gently. "Especially for a young woman with a child to raise. There's no shame in finding happiness again, Emma." The conversation left Emma unsettled, forcing her to acknowledge that her interest in Isaac Keller went beyond gratitude for his rescue. His quiet strength and understanding had awakened feelings she had thought were buried with Daniel. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. 5 days after their move to the Millers, Emma was hanging washing in the back garden when she heard Timothy's excited shout from the front of the house. "Mr. Fast Rider, you came back." Her heart beating faster than she cared to admit, Emma smoothed her apron and made her way around the house to find Isaac dismounting from midnight, Timothy already chattering at his side. The cowboy looked tired and dustier than usual, with several days' growth of beard darkening his jaw, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Mrs. Larkin," he greeted her with a slight tip of his hat. "I hear you've settled in well." "We have," she confirmed, suddenly conscious of her work-worn hands and the stray hairs escaping her bun. "Timothy loves having other children to play with, and the Millers have been very kind." "Did you catch the bad men?" Timothy asked, tugging on Isaac's sleeve. "The ones who made the cows run." Isaac's expression grew serious as he crouched to the boy's level. "Not yet, partner, but we're getting closer. Sheriff Bennett and I found their camp and some tracks leading north. We'll get them." He straightened, addressing Emma again. "We believe it's 3 men working for a land speculator named Hargrove who's been buying property along the likely railroad route. Sheriff's gathering evidence before making accusations." "Will it be enough to prove they caused the stampede deliberately?" Emma asked. Isaac's jaw tightened. "Should be, especially if we can match horseshoe prints from their mounts to tracks we found near where the stampede started." He paused. "Even if we can't prove it was intentional, they'll face charges for reckless endangerment at minimum. And my homestead, what happens to that land now?" Emma hadn't considered this aspect before. "Legally, it's still yours," Isaac explained. "You filed the proper claim papers, I assume. Even if you choose not to rebuild, you own the property until you sell it or abandon the claim for more than 6 months. The information gave Emma a sense of having options, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you for telling me, and for continuing to investigate." Isaac shrugged off her gratitude. "I don't like men who endanger women and children to line their pockets." His expression softened slightly. "Besides, I told Timothy I'd be back." The boy beamed at being remembered. "Can you stay for supper? Mrs. Miller always makes lots of food." Isaac looked to Emma for guidance, clearly not wanting to impose. She found herself nodding before she'd fully considered the implications. "We'd be pleased if you would join us. Dr. Miller would like to hear about your investigation, I'm sure." The evening that followed was one of the most pleasant Emma had experienced since Daniel's death. Isaac, though still reserved, seemed more at ease in the Miller household than he had been at the boarding house. He answered the doctor's questions about the investigation, entertained the children with a story about tracking a mountain lion that had Timothy wide-eyed with excitement, and occasionally caught Emma's eye across the table with a look that made her pulse quicken. After the meal, while Sarah put the younger children to bed, Dr. Miller invited Isaac to his study for a brandy. Emma used the opportunity to help Timothy prepare for bed in their rooms upstairs, assuming Isaac would be gone by the time they finished. To her surprise, when she came back downstairs after settling Timothy, she found Isaac waiting in the small sitting room adjacent to the surgery. "I thought you might have left," she said, pausing in the doorway. He shook his head, standing as she entered the room. "I wanted to speak with you privately before I went." Emma's heart fluttered nervously. "Is there news about the investigation you didn't want to mention in front of Timothy?" "No, nothing like that," Isaac assured her. He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, his usual directness faltering. "I wanted to ask if you'd consider. That is, if you might like to." He stopped, visibly collecting himself. "Sunday after church, would you and Timothy join me for a picnic by the river? If the weather holds, it should be pleasant." The invitation, so unexpected and so ordinary after the dramatic circumstances of their meeting, momentarily left Emma speechless. This wasn't an offer of assistance or a report on the investigation. It was simply a man asking to spend time with her and her son. "That would be lovely," she finally managed, a smile breaking across her face. "Timothy would enjoy that very much, as would I." Relief and something warmer flickered in Isaac's eyes. "Good, that's good." He reached for his hat, which he'd placed on a side table. "I should let you get some rest. It's been a long day." As he moved toward the door, Emma found herself wondering when he had last enjoyed simple companionship or taken time for pleasure rather than duty. On impulse, she touched his arm lightly, stopping him. "Thank you, Isaac, not just for the invitation, but for everything. For saving us, for investigating, for caring about what happens to us." His eyes held hers for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. "You're worth caring about, Emma Larkin," he said quietly, his use of her first name sending a shiver down her spine. "You and your boy both." With that, he was gone, leaving Emma standing in the doorway with her heart racing and a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Sunday dawned clear and warm, a perfect late spring day that seemed designed for picnics by the river. Emma dressed with unusual care in her second-best dress, a blue calico that Sarah insisted brought out the color of her eyes, and spent extra time arranging her hair, allowing it to fall in soft waves rather than her usual severe bun. Timothy, excited by the prospect of an outing with Mr. Fast Rider, wore his Sunday best and carried the small wooden horse Isaac had salvaged from their homestead. Isaac arrived promptly after the church service, driving a wagon rather than riding midnight. He had cleaned up considerably, wearing a fresh shirt under his vest and his dark hair neatly combed. The slight awkwardness of his greeting told Emma that he was as nervous about this outing as she was, a realization that somehow made her own nervousness easier to bear. The spot Isaac had chosen for their picnic was a shaded bend in the river about a mile outside of town, where the water ran clear over smooth stones, and a grassy bank provided the perfect place to spread a blanket. Timothy immediately wanted to wade in the shallow water, and Isaac obligingly removed his boots to accompany the boy, showing him how to look for minnows in the quiet pools near the shore. Emma watched them from the blanket, struck by the natural way Isaac interacted with her son. He was patient but not condescending, attentive without being overbearing, qualities she imagined would have made him an excellent father to the child he had lost. When they returned to the blanket, wet-troused and grinning, Emma had the picnic laid out: fried chicken that Sarah had helped her prepare, fresh bread, cheese, early strawberries, and a jar of lemonade. "This is a feast," Isaac commented as they began to eat, his eyes appreciative. "Mrs. Miller helped," Emma admitted. "I'm afraid cooking has never been my greatest talent." "Still better than mine," Isaac replied with a rare smile. "I can roast meat over a campfire and make decent coffee, but anything beyond that is a mystery." Their conversation flowed more easily than Emma had expected, moving from Isaac's investigation, still ongoing but promising, to Emma's adjustment to town life, better than anticipated, to Timothy's enthusiastic descriptions of his new friends and adventures. After they had eaten, Timothy grew drowsy in the warm afternoon sun, eventually falling asleep on the edge of the blanket. His absence from the conversation created a different atmosphere between Emma and Isaac, more intimate somehow, despite the open setting. "You're good with him," Emma observed softly, looking at her sleeping son. "He makes it easy," Isaac replied. "He's a fine boy, smart and brave like his mother." The compliment brought color to Emma's cheeks. "I don't feel very brave most of the time," she admitted. "Just doing what needs to be done." "That's what bravery is," Isaac said simply, "facing what comes even when it's hard." He hesitated, then added, "After Catherine died, I couldn't do that. I ran from everything, people, memories, responsibilities. Took to the trails and barely spoke to another soul for months." Emma's heart ached for his loss. "Grief affects us all differently. You found your way back eventually." Isaac looked out over the river, his profile strong against the afternoon light. "Some days I'm not sure I have found my way back, not completely." He turned to look at her directly. "Until recently." The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it fully. Instead, Emma asked, "Will you tell me about her, Catherine?" If Isaac was surprised by the request, he didn't show it. She was from back east originally, Boston, came west with her family when she was 16, educated, refined, everything I wasn't. A fond smile touched his lips at the memory. "We met when her father hired me to guide their wagon train through the mountains. She was fearless, always wanting to see what was over the next ridge. Her father thought I was a poor match, but she was determined." "She sounds remarkable," Emma said sincerely. "She was," Isaac agreed. "When she died, I thought that part of my life was over forever, the part where I belonged with someone." He met Emma's eyes. "I'm not good with words, Emma, but these past weeks, since meeting you and Timothy, I've started to think maybe there could be more again." The directness of his statement took Emma's breath away. She had expected their courtship, if that's what this was becoming, to proceed at a more measured pace. Yet there was something refreshing about Isaac's honesty, so different from the careful social niceties she had grown up with back east. "I've thought the same," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Which frightens me if I'm being equally honest. It's happened so quickly." Isaac nodded in understanding. "We don't need to rush anything. I just wanted you to know where I stand." He reached across the blanket to take her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "I'd like to court you properly, Emma Larkin, if you're willing." The traditional request, spoken in his deep voice with Timothy sleeping peacefully beside them and the river murmuring in the background, seemed perfectly right, despite the unconventional circumstances of their acquaintance. "I'd like that very much," Emma replied, her heart full as their fingers intertwined. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, neither feeling the need to fill the moment with words. When Timothy eventually stirred and woke, rubbing his eyes sleepily, the spell was broken, but the understanding between them remained. The journey back to town was filled with Timothy's renewed chatter, and occasional shared glances between Emma and Isaac that held new meaning. When they arrived at the miller's house, Isaac helped them down from the wagon with gentle hands, lingering slightly longer than necessary. "I'll be riding out with the sheriff again tomorrow," he told Emma as Timothy ran ahead to show his treasured river stones to the Miller children. "But I should be back within a few days." "Be careful," Emma said, suddenly conscious of the dangers he might face confronting men who had already proven their disregard for human life. Isaac's expression softened. "I will, and when I return, perhaps we could have dinner together. Just the two of us." The prospect of an evening alone with Isaac sent a flutter of anticipation through Emma. "I'd like that," she said. "Sarah has already offered to watch Timothy whenever I need." "She's observant, that one," Isaac commented with a hint of amusement. "Noticed my interest before I'd fully admitted it to myself." Emma laughed softly. "She mentioned something similar to me as well." With a promise to send word when he returned, Isaac departed, leaving Emma feeling lighter than she had in years, despite the uncertainty that still surrounded her future. The connection forming between them felt like the first green shoots after a hard winter, fragile but full of promise. The following days passed in a blur of activity as Emma settled further into her role in the Miller household. She found satisfaction in the orderly routine, and in watching Timothy flourish among the other children. News from the investigation came sporadically. Sheriff Bennett had identified 2 of the suspected men and was building a case against Hargrove, the land speculator believed to be behind the stampede. On the 4th day after their picnic, Emma was helping Sarah prepare vegetables for dinner when Dr. Miller burst into the kitchen, his expression grave. "They've brought Isaac in," he said without preamble. "He's been shot." Emma's blood ran cold. "How badly?" she managed to ask, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Shoulder wound. Not immediately life-threatening, but he's lost a good deal of blood. Sheriff Bennett is bringing him to the surgery now." Dr. Miller's eyes were kind but serious. "He was asking for you, Emma." Sarah immediately took the knife from Emma's nerveless fingers. "Go," she urged. "We'll manage here." Emma hurried to the surgery entrance just as Sheriff Bennett and another man were helping Isaac through the door. His face was ashen beneath his tan, his shirt soaked with blood down the left side, but his eyes found hers immediately. "Emma," he said, his voice weaker than she had ever heard it, "I'm sorry about dinner." The attempt at humor, despite his obvious pain, brought tears to her eyes. "Don't worry about that now," she said, moving to his uninjured side to help support him. "Let's get you taken care of first, Doctor." Miller directed them to the examination room where he quickly cut away Isaac's bloodied shirt to reveal a ragged bullet wound high on his left shoulder. Emma's nursing experience during the difficult births and illnesses at neighboring homesteads allowed her to assist calmly despite her inner turmoil, handing the doctor instruments and preparing bandages while Sheriff Bennett explained what had happened. "We confronted Hargrove and his men at their camp north of Willow Creek," the sheriff said, his weathered face grim. "They denied everything, of course, but when we mentioned the evidence we'd gathered, one of them panicked and drew his gun. Isaac took the bullet meant for me, Doctor." Miller worked efficiently as the sheriff spoke, cleaning and examining the wound. "The bullet passed clean through," he announced after his assessment. "Missed the major blood vessels, though it's nicked the bone. You're a lucky man, Isaac Keller." "Doesn't feel lucky at the moment," Isaac grunted, his jaw clenched against the pain as the doctor began to clean the wound more thoroughly. "Did you arrest them?" Emma asked the sheriff, partly to distract Isaac from the painful procedure. Sheriff Bennett nodded grimly. "Hargrove and both his hired guns. The shooting sealed their fate, even if we can't prove they deliberately caused the stampede. Attempted murder of a lawman will see them imprisoned for years." Isaac's eyes sought Emma's as Dr. Miller prepared to stitch the wound. "At least it's over now," he said, reaching for her hand with his good arm. "You and Timothy are safe." The simple statement, made despite his own suffering, touched Emma deeply. She squeezed his hand, offering what comfort she could as Dr. Miller began the painful process of stitching the wound. Throughout the procedure, Isaac remained stoically silent, though sweat beaded on his forehead and his grip on Emma's hand tightened occasionally. When it was finally done, Dr. Miller administered a dose of laudanum for the pain and instructed Isaac to remain in the surgery overnight for observation. "You lost a significant amount of blood," the doctor explained, "and fever is the main concern now. Emma will help me keep watch." Sheriff Bennett took his leave, promising to return the following day with an update on the prisoners. Once they were alone, Emma helped Isaac into a more comfortable position on the narrow bed in the surgery's recovery room. "You should rest," she told him softly, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. "The laudanum will help with the pain." Isaac's eyes were already growing heavy from the medication, but he fought to keep them open, focused on her face. When Bennett said one of them was drawing on him, all I could think was that if something happened to me, you and Timothy would be alone again. His voice was slurred slightly from the laudanum, but the sentiment was clear. Couldn't let that happen. Emma's heart constricted at his words. So you put yourself in danger instead. That's hardly a solution. A faint smile touched his lips. Seemed like the right choice at the time. His eyes began to close despite his efforts. "Stay with me," he murmured. "I'm not going anywhere," Emma promised, settling into the chair beside his bed and taking his hand once more. She remained at his side through the night, bathing his forehead when fever set in during the early hours, and helping Dr. Miller change the bandages when blood seeped through. By morning, the fever had broken, and Isaac was sleeping more peacefully. His color improved. Sarah brought Timothy to see Isaac briefly after breakfast, the boy's eyes wide with concern at seeing his hero confined to bed. "Are you going to die like Papa did?" he asked with the direct honesty of childhood. Isaac, though weak, managed a reassuring smile. "Not a chance, partner. Just need a little rest, and then I'll be good as new. Promise." The simple exchange reminded Emma how quickly Isaac had become important to both of them. The thought of losing him now, after finding this unexpected second chance at happiness, was unbearable. Dr. Miller declared Isaac well enough to be moved the following day, but travel to his home outside town was out of the question. "He needs rest and careful monitoring for at least a week," the doctor insisted. "The risk of infection is still significant." "He can stay here," Emma suggested immediately. "In our spare room, Timothy and I can manage with the larger bedroom." Dr. Miller considered this, then nodded. "That would be the best solution. Mrs. Miller and I can help with his care when you need rest." Isaac protested weakly that he didn't want to impose, but the decision had already been made. By that afternoon, he was installed in the small bedroom adjacent to Emma and Timothy's quarters, the arrangement both proper due to Timothy's presence and convenient for Emma to provide care. The days that followed established a new rhythm. Emma continued her duties for the Miller family while also tending to Isaac, whose strength returned gradually but steadily. Timothy appointed himself special helper, bringing Isaac water and keeping him company with stories and questions when Emma was busy elsewhere. As Isaac recovered, their relationship deepened through conversations that stretched into the evening after Timothy was asleep. They shared details of their past lives, Emma's sheltered upbringing in Pennsylvania, Isaac's hardscrabble childhood in Missouri, their respective journeys west with spouses now gone. They discovered shared values, compatible temperaments, and a mutual vision of what family life could be. "I never thought I'd consider town living," Isaac admitted one evening as they sat in the small sitting room, his arm still in a sling but his color and strength much improved. "Always valued my independence too much." "And now?" Emma asked, her needlework forgotten in her lap. Isaac's eyes held her steadily. "Now I'm thinking some things are worth changing for, or people rather." The implication warmed Emma from within. "Timothy would miss you terribly if you disappeared back to your solitary existence," she said, testing the waters. "Just Timothy?" Isaac asked softly. Emma set aside her sewing, gathering her courage. "No, not just Timothy." The admission hung between them for a moment before Isaac reached across with his good arm to take her hand. "Emma, I know it hasn't been long since we met, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. When I'm well enough, I'd like your permission to speak with Timothy man to man." "About what?" Emma asked, though she knew the answer. "About how I intend to ask his mother to be my wife," Isaac replied solemnly, "if she's willing." Joy bloomed in Emma's chest, unexpected and powerful. "I think she would be very willing," she whispered, "and I think Timothy would be overjoyed." Isaac's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and grief. Then, as soon as Dr. Miller says I can ride, I need to make a trip to my place. There's something there that belonged to my mother, something I've been saving. 3 weeks after the shooting, with his arm healing well and his strength fully restored, Isaac was finally pronounced fit enough to return to his own property. He departed early one morning with a promise to return the following day, leaving Emma with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness about what would come next. Timothy, now fully confident of Isaac's place in their lives, helped Emma prepare a special dinner for his return. "Is Mr. Isaac going to be my new papa?" he asked as they rolled out pie dough together. Emma paused, flour dusting her hands. "Would you like that?" she asked carefully. Timothy nodded with certainty. "He's brave and he tells good stories and he looks at you the way Papa used to. And he promised to teach me to ride midnight when I'm bigger." The simple, childish assessment brought tears to Emma's eyes. "Then yes, if he asks, and if you're truly happy about it, Mr. Isaac might become your new papa." Timothy seemed satisfied with this, returning his attention to the pie with renewed enthusiasm. Isaac returned as promised the next day, looking more formally dressed than Emma had ever seen him, in a clean white shirt with a string tie and his best vest. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, which he kept close as they sat down to the dinner Emma and Timothy had prepared. The meal passed with an undercurrent of expectancy that even Timothy seemed to sense, behaving with unusual decorum. When they had finished eating, Isaac asked Timothy if they might have a private conversation, man to man, as he had mentioned to Emma. Emma withdrew to give them privacy, her heart pounding as she cleared the dishes in the adjacent kitchen, straining to hear their murmured conversation. She could make out Timothy's excited response and Isaac's deeper tones, followed by what sounded like a solemn exchange of handshakes. When they called her back, Timothy was practically bouncing with excitement, while Isaac stood somewhat formally by the fireplace, the small package in his hands. "Timothy and I have had our discussion," Isaac said, his voice more serious than usual, "and he has given his blessing." Emma looked at her son, who nodded vigorously. "I said yes. Mama, Mr. Isaac asked if he could marry you and be my papa, and I said yes." The unfiltered joy in Timothy's announcement brought both laughter and tears. Isaac's expression softened as he looked at the boy, then returned his gaze to Emma. "It's not quite how I planned to ask," he admitted with a small smile, "but the question remains the same." He took a step toward her, then went down on one knee despite his still healing shoulder, opening the small package to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small pearl. "This was my mother's," he said, holding it out to her. "Emma Larkin, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" In that moment, Emma saw not just the man before her, but the future he offered: security, companionship, love for both her and her son. A chance to build something meaningful from the ashes of what they had both lost. "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside her. "With all my heart, yes." The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her. When Isaac rose to his feet, she stepped into his embrace, feeling his arms close around her with careful strength as Timothy clapped his hands in delight. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in Oregon City's small church, a simple ceremony attended by the Millers, Mrs. Holloway, Sheriff Bennett, and the few friends Emma had made during her time in town. Timothy stood proudly at Isaac's side, appointed as best man for the occasion, a role he took very seriously, carefully guarding the ring until the appropriate moment. After the ceremony, the small group gathered at the Miller's home for a celebration meal. As Emma watched Isaac talking with Dr. Miller, Timothy leaning comfortably against his side, she reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. The devastating stampede that had destroyed her homestead had ultimately led her to a happiness she hadn't thought possible again. Mrs. Holloway appeared at her side, following her gaze with a knowing smile. "Everything happens for a reason, my dear," she said, patting Emma's hand. "Even the hardest trials can lead us where we're meant to be." "I never imagined I could feel this way again," Emma admitted softly. "After Daniel died, I thought that part of my life was over." "The heart has an amazing capacity to heal and grow," Mrs. Holloway replied. "And you found a good man in Isaac Keller, the kind who rides through dust and danger to save what matters." The older woman's words echoed in Emma's mind that evening as she and Isaac prepared to leave for their new home. Instead of moving to Isaac's property immediately, they had decided to remain in town until the railroad matter was fully resolved, renting a small house not far from the Millers. In time, they planned to divide their time between town and Isaac's land, giving Timothy the benefits of both education in town and the freedom of country living. As they settled Timothy into his new bedroom, the boy already half asleep after the excitement of the day, he reached for Isaac's hand. "Are you my papa now, for real?" he asked drowsily. Isaac knelt beside the bed, his expression solemn. "For real and forever," he promised. "Nothing will ever change that." The simple exchange, witnessed in the soft lamplight of their son's new room, cemented for Emma that they had truly become a family, not replacing what was lost, but building something new and equally precious. Later, as they stood together on the porch of their new home, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky, Isaac wrapped his arms around Emma from behind, drawing her against his chest. "Happy?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her hair. Emma leaned back into his embrace, covering his hands with her own where they rested at her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "I was thinking," Isaac said after a comfortable silence, "about what might have happened if I hadn't been driving those cattle that day. If I hadn't seen you and Timothy in the path of that stampede." The thought sent a chill through Emma despite the warmth of the spring evening. "I try not to think about that," she admitted. Isaac tightened his arms around her slightly. "I believe we would have found each other anyway," he said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be." As Emma turned in his arms to meet his kiss, she found herself agreeing with his assessment. From tragedy had come unexpected joy, from loss had come renewal, and from a moment of terror had come the love that now defined their lives. 1 year later, on a bright autumn day, Emma stood on the porch of the house Isaac had expanded on his land outside Oregon City. The original structure had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with wide windows that looked out over the rolling countryside toward the distant mountains. Timothy, now 5 and full of energy, was helping Isaac mend a fence at the edge of the property, the two of them working together with the easy companionship that had developed between them. In the cradle beside Emma, 2-month-old Catherine Eliza Keller slept peacefully, her tiny features a perfect blend of her parents'. The railroad had indeed come through the region, but thanks to Sheriff Bennett's thorough investigation and testimony from other affected homesteaders, Hargrove had been convicted of multiple crimes and sentenced to prison. The railroad company, eager to distance itself from the scandal, had offered fair compensation to those whose land they needed, including a generous sum for Emma's original homestead. With that money and Isaac's savings, they had built a life that balanced the best of both worlds, the community of town and the freedom of their country property. Isaac still occasionally worked as a guide or tracker when his special skills were needed, but more often he focused on raising horses, a pursuit that had proven both satisfying and profitable. As Emma watched her husband and son walking back toward the house, their figures silhouetted against the golden afternoon light, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The stampede that had seemed like the end of everything had instead been the beginning of a new journey, one that had brought her through dust and danger to unexpected joy. Isaac reached the porch, Timothy running ahead inside to get a drink of water. He smiled at Emma, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she loved, before leaning down to peek at their sleeping daughter. "She has your eyes," he said softly, touching the baby's cheek with a gentle finger. "And your stubborn nature," Emma replied with a smile. She fought sleep for an hour before finally surrendering. Isaac laughed quietly, then straightened to pull Emma into a one-armed embrace, careful not to disturb the cradle. "Any regrets?" he asked, his eyes searching hers with the directness that had first drawn her to him. Emma shook her head, leaning into his strength. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step, even the painful ones, led us here." As Isaac's lips met hers in a kiss that still held the power to make her heart race, Emma knew with absolute certainty that the life they had built together, born from chaos and danger, nurtured through healing and hope, was everything she could have wished for and more than she had ever dared to dream. Behind them, Catherine stirred and made a small noise, while inside the house, Timothy could be heard chattering to Mrs. Miller, who had come to visit with her youngest children. The sounds of their family, their home, their life together surrounded them like a blessing. "I love you, Emma Keller," Isaac murmured against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, her voice carrying the weight of all they had overcome and all they had become together, through dust and danger and whatever else life brings our way.